and welcome to Nothing But a Number. I'm delighted to be joined today by Iain Dale. Iain is one of Britain's leading political commentators and bloggers and a serial podcaster as well, I know Iain, and an award-winning broadcaster. You now present the evening show on LBC amongst many, many other things. I'm really grateful for your in-depth knowledge of so much. As you know,
feel like that all the time, I have to say.
The focus of the podcast is very much around age and the role of age, and I know you've done a lot of work on it and had a lot of thoughts yourself. But let's just kind of go back to the beginning. Did you ever sit down and plan your career, Iain?
No. I mean, I've always been active in either the media or politics in some regard. But I wanted to either be an MP or a radio presenter. I tried to be an MP, but the electorate fought back. And I'm now a radio presenter. So I reckon to fulfill 50% of your ambition is good. But there's still that virus that just can't quite go away. And people keep saying, oh, well, you're not too old. And I think, well, actually, I am. But you're living proof that you're not.
You've got 7 years.
If I may say so.
You've got 6 years. But... yes. May I say it's not all it's cracked up to be? Do you think older people get a hard time?
Well, I think it depends how you live your life, how you're able to live your life. I think if you are somebody who is an older person and you have got no money, you have quite a difficult time. And when we talk about the pensions triple lock on the show, and I always point out that actually pensioners are the richest segment of society. But if you're not a rich pensioner, or if you can't, you find it difficult to survive, that's scant comfort to you to know that sort of you may be the exception. So, do pensioners get a rough ride generally? I would have to say generally no, but you actually can't generalise because each individual is different, each individual's circumstances are different, and what may be seen as a nice lifestyle for one person it is not for another necessarily.
But I guess it's also about mindset. I'm going to quote something back at you now that you wrote a while ago. Turning 50 meant nothing to me, or 40 or 30, but 60, well, that's old, isn't it? Most of our parents' generation would have retired in their 60s. I feel as though I'm mid-career, not at the end of it. But turning 60 means you have to confront reality.
Yes, turning 60 did mean something to me. Kay Adams, I don't know if you listened to her podcast, How to Be 60, and I did that, I think, a week before my 60th birthday. And I'm not going to say you sort of get this doom and gloom, oh my God, I'm going to die soon. But it does, these thoughts do go through your mind that, I mean, I know it's pathetic, but I count the rest of my life in how many more World Cups I'm going to see, sort of every 4 years. I reckon if I have another 4, for a diabetic, I'll have done quite well, but it could only be 2. Will I ever see England win a World Cup again? And I know it's a silly way to look at these things, but and people are living longer now. But if you have comorbidities, and if you are a type 2 diabetic who finds it incredibly difficult to control it, you know that you're going to die before your peers, probably. I mean, there are lots of exceptions to this, but it does bring it home to you.
And does that alter your life now, the way you live your life, the knowledge that, I wouldn't say you're in the final chapter, but you know, it sounds very morbid, doesn't it? But the knowledge that probably, that end is closer than the beginning was.
Well, I mean, you have to be realistic, and it's quite clear. I'm not going to live to 120. I wouldn't want to live to 120. I don't think I'd want to live to 100, or only if I could be sure that I would be reasonably healthy. I think a long life is something that most people do aspire to, but not under all circumstances. And I've always been a big supporter of assisted dying, because I think that, and I go far further than most on it, in that I don't think you should have to have a terminal condition to decide when you want to end your life. I think it's your decision about about when you think that you're ready to go. I think a lot of rubbish is talked about, the dangers of this. Of course, there will be, the law has to be constructed so it protects people, but it's surely possible to do.
I read with interest an article you wrote in 2015 in Gay World, when you said, old age is a faraway place which merits very little thought. That you were born in 1962, and you feel that you're very lucky. You're married and happily married, but there are lots of people who are in their 50s and 60s, gay singletons who have the fear of being alone and the fear of retirement homes that maybe are, I wouldn't say discriminatory, but there's little understanding, and therefore that they might have to go back in the closet, I think was the way you put it. And I was fascinated by the suggestion of two ideas. One of gay retirement homes, which you say have existed in other countries for quite a long time, but also communes. I recall sort of in the 60s all the kind of hippie communes and everything, but it is certainly a way of removing that isolation and being with people who understand you and care about you.
Well, I think isolation is a big thing for single gay people, not actually just in older years, although I guess it's more stark then. I mean, I've been lucky. I've been in a relationship for 29 years, which in gay world is a century. And because people have got this image of gay people as sort of going from partner to partner, not really establishing close relationships. That's changing now, I think. But there are still many people, I know many people in their 40s and 50s who now believe that they will never find someone, because it's always been this way in a way, that being gay is always seen as a young person's thing. You live a sort of slightly hedonistic lifestyle, but at some point that comes to an end. I think it depends on who you are and what your character is. But I've got a friend who's just turned 40, and I think he's always thought that he could never have a relationship, but now realises that if he doesn't get on with it, it may be a bit late. The thing is, though, that there is always somebody out there. You just have to find them. And that's where, I mean, dating apps in the straight world are really good, but in the gay world, dating apps revolve predominantly around one-night stands. And I think it's quite difficult on sort of things like Grindr to find love. I mean, you can find a short-term satisfaction, but I doubt whether... You'll always have this thing in the back of your mind, well, I met this person on Grindr, is he going to go on Grindr sort of again? And then he's probably thinking the same about you. So it's not a great way of starting a trusting relationship.
I mean, isn't that true generally about dating apps? I confess I've never been on one, but I think you know I've told you my history, 4 times divorced, So I face the prospect of old age on my own, possibly. It's gay or heterosexual. It's as lonely.
I think that's right. I mean, I've never dreaded being... I like my own company. I'm quite happy. My partner hates going on holiday. I love holidays. And we have literally nothing in common. How we've lasted 29 years, it's just we only have dogs and cars in common. So he doesn't like going on holiday, but that's no objection if I want to go somewhere on my own. And even in my 20s, I would happily go off to the United States on my own and sort of tour around. It can get lonely sometimes because a holiday is essentially a shared experience, and if you can't share it, okay, you can phone home every night, but it's not quite the same, is it?
No. Thinking about your career and your experience of politics and the media, how do you think age influences public perception of leaders and influencers? I mean, I think, we look at the American elections now. I couldn't imagine the same candidates standing in UK politics and being accepted by the general public.
I can't either at the moment, but of course we have had older prime ministers. Winston Churchill was, Gladstone was, and he's prime minister 4 times. I can't remember how old he was in his last term of office, but I think he was in his 80s. So it's not unheard of, but I think it would be very difficult for an older politician to stand up to the rigours of the demands of modern-day politics.
You also have talked about the questioned whether ageism is the forgotten prejudice. And, we know it's a protected characteristic, but racism or discrimination on the basis of gender and sexuality is possibly more obviously unacceptable. And I just wonder, how we tackle that.
Well, I think it is something that we don't talk about enough. I remember when I first went on the Conservative Party candidates list, when I was 40, I think, which is quite late, actually. Most people go on way before that. And I wrote an article on Conservative Home about the fact that the party is losing out by not selecting older candidates because they're the people with the experience. And I know that at the age of 61, which I am now, I would be a far better member of Parliament than I ever would have done when I stood when I was 42. Because I've got so much more experience. I don't think this sounds really weird, but I don't think I knew myself until I was 50, i.e. what was I good at, what was I not good at, what did I like doing, what did I hate doing. And it was only then that the sort of slight, I don't think I've had a chip on my shoulder, but it's the only phrase I can use. Like if I would be in a group talking with like David Cameron, George Osborne, Ed Vaizey, Nick Bowles, people who'd all been to public school, I always held back and didn't really contribute much to the conversation. And it was really only when I was 50 that I thought, well, actually, I've proved myself. I don't need to feel inferior to these people. And it was quite a revelation in them. I mean, it wasn't one day where I suddenly thought, oh, I can compete with the David Camerons of this world. But it was quite freeing to realise that I didn't have that problem anymore.
I totally get that. I feel the same. I mean, I certainly I didn't even think about politics until I was over 50. And it won't surprise you to know that the reason I was selected for Stoke Central was it was a completely unwinnable seat. And by some quirk of Brexit and Boris and Jeremy Corbyn, timing is absolutely everything. And yes, I mean, I'm massively grateful for it, but it wasn't because of any great change of policy on older candidates being suitable for good seats or for winnable seats.
That's the thing. In most European countries, you don't get into serious politics until your 40s or 50s. Here, if you aren't in the House of Commons by the time you're 40, you're almost written off. And I think that's really, really bad and we see the consequences of it today, where most of our leading politicians are under the age of 50. And I mean, they haven't done a particularly brilliant job over the last 10 years, I don't think. And I think that is in part due to lack of experience, due to lack of wisdom. And I hope that there will be a shift. I don't think we should go to the extent that the Americans have. And there are plenty of 78, 80-year-olds who actually could do the job very well. It just happens to be that we've got two candidates there who don't fall into that category.
Yes, I mean it's not about, as we say, it's not about the number. It's about how fit you are, how mentally able and agile you are. And I've met many people much younger who probably don't have both the aspiration and the inspiration to do some of the leadership jobs.
I wonder how much this figures in John Swinney's decision as to whether to stand for the leader of the SNP. I mean, we're recording this a day after Hamza Yousaf resigned, and clearly John Swinney is coming under a lot of pressure. Now, I thought John Swinney was in his late 60s. It turns out he's nearly 2 years younger than me. And yet, to me, he looks a lot older than, I hope you agree, older than me. And I think that may well play a part in his decision. Do I feel physically up to doing this? Because I think it's very different being an MP or an MSP than being leader. Because if you're leader or prime minister, first minister, every single minute of your day is accounted for. You're on the go the whole time. Pressure is on you the whole time. And you have to understand yourself to know whether you're up to that.
Yes, the physicality of the job is an interesting one. I look around, I think there were 19 MPs who ran the London Marathon this year. And, you see a lot of colleagues exercising as well as doing the job. And there is a requirement to knock on thousands of houses in your constituency, everything. And sometimes it saddens me that we've reduced politics to the kind of physical fitness of somebody, where I think a good constituency MP, can cover a lot of ground without needing to be physically on the top of their game, London Marathon ready.
Well, that is true. I mean, I think of Dame Anne Begg, who was MP in Aberdeen for quite some time. She was in a wheelchair. Now, I don't think anybody accused her of not being a good constituency MP, so it is possible. But, I mean, if I'm honest, I've had sort of a few health problems over the last 12 months, do I feel, if I did decide I wanted to stand at the next election, which I won't, but if I did, I would have to be honest with myself and say, well, you can't approach your campaigning in the same way that you did in 2005, because it would be, I mean, that was a strain enough. And particularly if you're in a constituency that's very big, and mine was 70 miles from one side to the other, even the travel part of it is sort of slightly exhausting. So I think you do have to weigh these things up.
Don't you think, I mean, you know, I ran through the list of all the podcasts and blogs, and your presence on social media is massive, and that surely, in modern elections, must be enough, I would have thought. I mean, do you think that posting leaflets through letterboxes is still the sort of most important aspect of a general election?
I still think it's part of it. It really is. I've just brought out a book called British General Election Campaigns 1830 to 2019, and you look at the campaigning methods from the mid-1800s, and many of them are the same as there are now. Now, obviously, technology has changed things and makes it easier to reach some people in some ways. But I think the old-fashioned door-to-door canvassing, leafleting, putting posters up, that all still has a role to play.
Yes, and the messaging. I mean, it's interesting. We also have the disinformation, and social media used very much to smear politicians, to undermine the integrity, if you like, of public office. And I think a lot of politicians have felt threatened during their time in Parliament. I mean, does it still attract
I think
you?
that's much more so nowadays than it was even 10 years ago. And anybody in the public eye has that. I mean, I have it every day during my show. If we're talking about Israel and Gaza, my text and tweet screen, sometimes I have to cover up because it is so disgusting what people write. You think, how can people who normally you would pass the time of day with write something like that on a public platform? It is appalling. But having a social media profile, or indeed any sort of public profile, is a two-edged sword in that, yes, you do become better known than maybe your opponents, but is that always in a good way? When I stood in 2005, I actually lived in the constituency. The MP didn't. And yet, because I was on television a lot, I was seen as that bloke from London. And looking back, I think my profile was actually quite damaging. I'd started a blog, one of the first to do so. Twitter wasn't around at that time, but I started doing little videos as well. And I mean, a lot of people liked that sort of thing, but it was seen as a little bit too clever by half by some, I think.
You published an annual list of the 100 most influential people on the right. What do you think makes someone influential? How do you categorise it?
If you ring somebody up, they take your call, I guess. I mean, that's the shorthand way of putting it. I did these lists for about 12 years, I think. I haven't done them for some time now. And people kept saying, well, you should put yourself on the list. I said, look, I may have an ego, but it's not that giant-sized. But if I want to ring up a cabinet minister, they'll generally take the call. Often when I cover a subject on my show, and I think, well, I wonder if they've thought about this aspect of their policy, where there's clearly a problem, because I've had 3 listeners in a row tell me what the problem is. And I'll always remember when Therese Coffey was at the Department of Work and Pensions, somebody rang me up and said, well, look, this was during COVID. I'm a waspy woman, and they tell me that my universal credit is finishing on such and such a date, but my pension won't start until 6 months later. What am I supposed to do for that 6 months for income? Well, I had no answer. So I rang Therese up and I said, if there's one person that's telling me this, I imagine there are probably quite a few others. She said, I'll check it out. So she got her permanent secretary to check it out. And I think, if memory serves me correctly, there were 35,000. And they solved it. And this person that rang in phoned me up a couple of weeks later and said, oh my God, it's all solved. So that's where the system can work. But then people will say, yeah, but it shouldn't have to take a radio presenter to ring up a cabinet minister to make that happen. But in the absence of anything else happening, I'm going to, I wouldn't say abuse my position, but I will use my position if I think it can do some good.
But don't you think what you're basically saying, and I've thought this for some time, that you have more power than a parliamentarian, because you have the voice of 35,000 people telling you, you can say with authority, I know this to be a much bigger problem than my one constituent, because you have that platform, and ministers will take it seriously because you also have the opportunity to publicise the fact that they're not doing their job properly.
You called it power. I don't think it is power. I think it is influence. I can at the margins influence. The loan charge is another one which I've taken up, and so far got very, not really anywhere. But without my input to that position, I don't think the campaign would have really caught fire in the way that it has. But it's not solved yet, so I can't take any credit really. But I think you have to differentiate between influence and power. You as an MP have power to change the law. I don't. I can influence you with my force of argument to try and persuade you to start a bill or something. But that's the extent of it. You are still reliant on other people. I always use Lynn Featherstone as a really good example of this, where when she became a minister, a Liberal Democrat minister in the coalition government in the Home Office, I think in the first week they were all told to go to the Institute for Government to listen to Michael Heseltine tell them how to be a minister. And his one bit of advice was that she certainly took to heart was, as a junior minister, you will only have time to achieve one thing. So decide what it is now. So on her walk back to the Home Office that day, she decided that equal marriage was going to be her thing. And that is what will go on her gravestone. Now, I think that's a massive achievement. Okay, she wasn't a backbencher. She had the ability to start it as a minister, but she had to persuade Theresa May, she had to persuade David Cameron, and she did it, even though she was from the minority party. And there are hundreds of MPs who at some point in their careers will have influenced a piece of legislation in a way that nobody else did or could have. So when people say that MPs don't have any power, I think you do, but you have to know how to exercise it.
Yes, I mean, that's a great example. But as you point out, it was a minister that initially had the power. It's possibly slightly more challenging from the backbenches, although...
Well, look at Anna Firth.
Yeah.
I mean, she's a new MP. She replaced David Amess. She's only been in Parliament for, 18 months, 2 years. And she's got this pets protection bill going through to sort of try and prevent pet theft. And I think it is going to get on the statute book. It started out as a private member's bill, and not all of them get on the statute book. And she's done it by sheer force of her personality. Hasn't
the lottery, she was drawn.
Yeah, she was lucky to get high up in the lottery.
Exactly.
But she's taken advantage of the opportunity that it presented to her. Not everyone does that.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
There will be people that want to grandstand and get a momentary flicker of media coverage on a cause that's dear to them, but they know that it's never going to become law. It's just to get publicity. Whereas she identified a problem, drafted a bill, and has persuaded the government to support it.
Yeah, no, that makes absolute sense. I wanted to look at going back to the. Well, actually, no. I wanted to ask you about the loan, what you'd mentioned your campaign, because I'm wondering if it has any link to the work that I'm doing with Dave Fishwick, which I think you know a little bit about, and Dave has been working with the ITV and various outlets on loan sharks. Is that in any way connected?
No, it isn't. That's something very different.
Yeah.
But this is, I think the loan charge is a scandal as big as the post office scandal, where hundreds of thousands of perfectly innocent, upstanding people took advice.
You're listening to Nothing But a Number, the podcast that looks at age and ageing with a wide array of fabulous guests. We've got some brilliant guests coming in the next few weeks, and if you want to be notified when the next upload is, please subscribe and click the notification bell, and we'll tell you exactly what's coming next.
And now HMRC have decided they don't approve of them, and they're going for back tax over 20 years. Now, fine, if you change the tax system, I have no objection to any government doing that, but you can't go back 20 years. I always thought 6 years was the maximum that you could go back, but apparently not. And HMRC is a really good example of one of these government agencies that's at arm's length that politicians don't control. The Chancellor cannot ring up the head of HMRC and say, I want you to do this. And you think, what's the point of being Chancellor if you don't have that power? It's the same with the Highways Agency. Mark Harper has no power to say to the Highways Agency, I see you're closing both the M11, the A11 and the A12 next Friday night. What on earth are you thinking? Because nobody will be able to get to Norfolk. And this happens on a regular basis. But they can basically tell him to bugger off. And this is where the loan charge is so insidious because these people, there have been at least 12 suicides because of it. They come after the people for hundreds of thousands of pounds in back tax and expect them to pay it within a very short period of time. So people go bankrupt, they have to sell their houses. And the mental health consequences of that, well, you can but imagine. And there are so many examples. And these people are Tory voters, a lot of them. And you think, what on earth is a Conservative government doing allowing this to happen? I remember the first time I explained this to David Davis. He said, no, you must have got this wrong. It can't be true. I said, well, go on, you go and have a look yourself then. And he came back and he said, oh, my God, I'd never thought this sort of thing could happen. And it's a cross-party thing. It's not a Tory thing. And the campaign is run by a former Lib Dem MP, Greg Mulholland. And it's began to catch fire. But because when you talk about tax schemes, people automatically think, oh, there's something a bit dodgy there. So these people are never going to get the level of public support that the post office people did because they just don't have that kind of profile. So, I mean, the one thing I think I really have contributed to this is that I talked to Rachel Reeves about it and she really got it. And I'm hoping that should there be a Labour government, they will actually do something about it.
I mean, do you think that the problem is that we've got too many arm's length bodies that are not accountable
Absolutely.
to government?
And they were set up for the right reasons. A lot of them were set up under the major government, but Gordon Brown really put a turbocharge under this. And it was to take the politics out of things. And I've never really bought that argument. People say, oh, we should take the politics out of the NHS. No, you shouldn't. The NHS spends £1 in £5 that the entire government spends. Should there be no democratic accountability for that? Of course there should. And it's the same for many other of these agencies. So I think they were started with good intentions, but it actually enabled politicians to wash their hands of a problem. And I would like to see that reversed now. I mean, I'd love to see in the Conservative manifesto of the next election a commitment to abolish some of them. I mean, you're never going to abolish all of them, but there are some that really don't deserve to exist.
So which are on your hit list?
Highways Agency, or National Highways as they're called. I think they are a disgraceful organisation and with no accountability, and that they really are a law unto themselves. It's funny, when I saw Mark Harper recently, he said, oh, we had an advert to be chairman of the Highways Agency. I half expected you to apply. I said, I don't think I'd get an interview given what I've said about them in the past.
So at this point in the interview, I always like to look at what happened in the year of your birth.
Oh my God.
Which is quite a few things, interesting things happened. Some more interesting than others. So Marilyn Monroe was found dead in her LA hotel room. Brazil won the World Cup in Chile. I know you're a football fan. Harold Macmillan had the Night of the Long Knives. And we have the Cuban Missile Crisis, which, as you know, it brought us to the brink of nuclear war, and I think it was the start of the Cold War that continues. I would say almost to this day with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I think we're kind of back to where we started. The Beatles played their first session at Abbey Road, and the Rolling Stones made their debut.
I've never been into the Beatles or the Rolling Stones. Never liked either of them.
So what's your musical preference?
You're now going to wish you hadn't gone there. I like rubbish pop music. I like ABBA, Roxette, Meatloaf, Dire Straits, Alphaville, Erasure, Pet Shop Boys, all that sort of thing.
So have you been to Voyage?
I have been to Voyage, in which I can highly recommend to anybody.
Amazing,
even people who are not that keen on ABBA think it's fantastic.
Yeah.
And you're really enveloped into it because you think, well, how can this be? They're obviously not real people, they are avatars, but within 2 minutes you believe they are real. Yeah. And people laugh at that, but you go and you will do.
Yeah.
Brilliant how they do it.
So is that a way that we can stop ageing, to have avatars of ourselves?
Well, that would be an interesting one, wouldn't it? Because ABBA's avatars are as they were in 1977. And I'm trying to think, what era would my avatar be? Probably the mid-1980s, when I had a huge amount of hair, believe it or not. And, I think probably the mid-1980s when I was 25.
And what would you have been doing around that time?
Well, I graduated in 1985 from UEA, did a degree in German, intending to be a German teacher. Well, that never happened. And then, excuse me. And then I came to work in the House of Commons for 2 years. And it was very different in those days. I mean, this place that we're recording this interview now, Portcullis House, did not exist. And the centre of gravity in Parliament was the two cafes in the middle of Parliament, which I don't think are hardly used now. Everybody's always in Portcullis House. And I remember on my first day walking down the corridor from Central Lobby into the House of Lords, where I encountered the other way coming Jim Callaghan and President Ford. And I did think to myself, what's the boy from Essex doing in a place like this? Because I've always had sort of imposter syndrome to an extent. And then you would just encounter Margaret Thatcher walking down the corridor. And Parliament was very different in those days. I mean, when I finished work of an evening, I'd often go into the gallery and just watch a debate. I don't think many people do that nowadays. And I absolutely loved it. But I knew that I had to go at the 87 election, because otherwise I could have easily done that job for the rest of my life and become one of these rather sad parliamentary lifers. So I left in 87 to go into the world of public affairs, which... I mean, it's interesting how you can look back and see different sliding doors moments. I got a job as public affairs manager for the British Ports Federation purely because I was on holiday in Detroit and went into a library, got a copy of the Times and saw this advert. And I thought, well, I could do that. So I applied for it, beat 170 people to get it. I think they appointed me because the MP that I worked for had been a PPS at the Department of Transport, so they kind of assumed that I'd know my way around there. I'd never been into the Department of Transport, let alone met a civil servant. But that was where it really all started. And I was lucky because I was running a campaign to get rid of some employment legislation, persuading Margaret Thatcher's government to do it. And I did that within 2 years, not just me, but a team. And I then became one of the main media spokespeople during a 3-month-long dock strike. So I was sort of on television and radio virtually every day, and I thought, I rather like doing this. So everything else sort of stemmed from that, really.
So would you say your life's been a little bit serendipitous?
Yeah, up to a point. I mean, timing, as we said before, is everything, and sometimes I've been at the wrong place at the wrong time. I mean, when I fought an election, which if I'd fought that same seat in 2019, I would have won. So... It hasn't been all smooth sailing by any stretch of the imagination. I've started various companies. I've never had a failure, but I've never made a lot of money out of any of the companies. And most of them been in books and publishing. And I've enjoyed that. But there have been a couple of times along the way when I remember when I was a candidate, I was walking around Cromer one Friday afternoon with 16 pence in my pocket. My overdraft was maxed out, all my credit cards were maxed out, and I thought, how did I get myself into this situation, and vowed never to do it again? And I was lucky because I bought a cottage in North Norfolk, and after the election, I sold it for exactly the balance between the price that I'd bought it for and the debts that I'd built up. So it was like a difference of 40,000, and I thought, let that be a lesson to you. Don't ever do that again. And people don't understand the cost of being a candidate. And if you don't come from a moneyed background, which I don't, people expect you to do things, and they don't. I mean, many associations, I think, are very wrong in expecting their candidates to pay to go to events or buy raffle tickets. I mean, you count up how much that costs you over a year, and it's a 4-figure sum. And now, okay, all the people are volunteers, and they're sort of giving up a lot of time and money to campaign for you. But should the candidate really be burdened with all of that? I don't think so.
Well, I think you make a good point around, if we want diversity in the party and people from backgrounds where, you don't have somebody who can pay the bills for you. I mean, I served a 17-year apprenticeship before I became an MP. I don't come from a money background either, and my whole life was really designed around being flexible enough that you could relocate, and therefore it doesn't give you that kind of career planning that other people that haven't got that kind of ultimate goal would have.
And it's also about compromise in that my partner is not into politics and has always lived in the same place and has no intention of ever living anywhere else. Now, when I went for the Bracknell constituency in 2010, he did actually say he would move there, which I was astonished at. But I got through to the final of Beverley in East Yorkshire. And I was quite surprised to have done that because it was just done to get some experience, really. And I said to him, I might win this. He said, well, if you think I'm moving to bloody Yorkshire, you've got another thing coming. And the same, I went for Monmouth in Wales. I'd never even been to Wales before. And I was bound to have told somebody that. And if it got out to the local paper, it was a beautiful constituency. And in many ways, I'd love to have done it. But you do have to compromise with partners, with family. And I probably would have had a much more scattergun approach had I not been in a relationship. But then again, I'm absolutely convinced that if I had got a seat, he and I would not be together now. Absolutely convinced of it, because I don't think it... I mean, well, you know this better than anyone, that the amount of time that this job takes up, and there's only a certain amount of times you can say, oh, it'll be different next week or next month, and it isn't actually. And okay, you have control over your diary, but if you want to climb the greasy pole, you have to make compromises to do that. And that often means that people's families are the ones that lose out.
Yes. And I mean, that's another reason why being older with grown-up family, before you become an MP, actually, I mean, it's worked very well for me. But
when you told your children that you wanted to be an MP, what did they say? What was their reaction?
Well, I think that the reaction was more a Conservative MP. My daughter describes me as one of the good ones.
Well, there are good ones.
Yeah, but so they don't necessarily agree with my politics, but they're proud of what I've achieved. So, at one level, I think
Would they vote for you if they lived in your constituency?
Oh, that's a tough one.
Because my sister has told me in terms that no way would she vote for me. And she's a sort of Liberal Democrat, a little bit Labour, but mostly Liberal Democrat, and absolutely no way. And I was really offended by that, because I would. I mean, I do think family comes first. Yeah. Okay, if she was a communist, I wouldn't, but
there you go.
I just sort of, I was really hurt.
So I tried to separate out family and professional life to the extent that, my daughter became very interested in politics during the Brexit campaign. And I mean, I was a Remainer, but I represent the Brexit capital of the UK. And I think she struggled to know how I could do that while still, believing that we should have stayed in. And so she campaigned. So we couldn't discuss Brexit at all. I mean, for several years, it was a completely taboo subject in the family. But as long as we don't discuss politics, we all get on really well.
Marvellous.
But it is a dividing thing, and it has become more and more divisive, I think, which is also something you have to reflect.
There's no sense of nuance anymore. I mean, Boris Johnson is either a heroic figure or an evil charlatan, and there's no grey ground in between, is there? People either have a very positive view or a very negative view, and they can't say, well, actually, he did a really good job on Ukraine, even though he was crap on COVID. And this lack of sense of nuance really frustrates me. And I remember one day I did a phone-in where I praised Boris for Ukraine, and then the next day I slagged him off for something else. And people get phoning and say, well, you're such a hypocrite. How can you do that? I said, no, because I look at the issues on their merits, and I don't see someone as all bad or all good. None of us are. And certainly politicians aren't. But people don't get that.
No, there was a lovely quote I had from, you see if I can find it, which basically said something like, I treat everybody equally badly, or, it is that thing, isn't it, of fairness, isn't agreeing with everybody, or it's allowing people to have their voice, but, also allowing yourself to criticise, and expecting respect, I think, on both sides. And the respect has gone out of political debate, I think.
Absolutely. And I've always respected my political opponents. I've always tried to have a good relationship with them, because I think, well, what's the point of not? you don't have to hate somebody to fight an election against them. And most candidates are in it for the right reasons. And I mean, I was fighting Norman Lamb, who I think most people, regardless of their politics, thought was a good MP. And it was quite a struggle. And I used to have loads of people say, oh, can't we have both of you? And I said, well, it doesn't really work like that. I said, but I can get things done because I'd be a member of the governing party. Okay, he was, as it turned out, but I still think I could have got more done than he could. And we've become quite friendly over the years.
And I think that's the way it should be. I mean, it took me a while.
Keith Simpson says it's Stockholm syndrome.
Really?
Yeah, he never understood how I could be really decent friends with Norman Lamb, as if I was somehow letting the side down.
It is bizarre because it's tribal, isn't it? And I mean, we have this now within the Conservative Party, let alone with the opposition, that either you're with us or you're not a Tory, which I find quite offensive, to be honest, because I think we all have our own values which differ slightly. But, the Conservative Party used to be a broad church where there was tolerance across.
And winning elections is all about having a broad church. Yeah. I mean, when I was here in the 1980s, you'd have John Carlyle, known as the member for Bloemfontein South, sort of very pro-South African, and then you'd have somebody like Jim Lester, a Midlands MP, sort of as wet as anything. But they quite happily coexisted in the same party. We've lost that ability now.
You're listening to Nothing But a Number, the podcast that looks at age and ageing with a wide array of fabulous guests. We've got some brilliant guests coming in the next few weeks, and if you want to be notified when the next upload is, please subscribe and click the notification bell, and we'll tell you exactly what's coming next. So we were talking about the fact that you need to have different sorts of MPs within the same party for different constituencies. And I think it's never been more true than the 2019 election saw us winning seats that we probably won't retain to a large extent, but that were from very different parts of the country that required different sorts of MPs. And then, the need to embrace the diversity of those MPs. I get very cross, I'm sure you can understand why, when people try and typify the red wall seats as all one homogenous, racist, immigration being the top thing, that they don't care about anything else. I have a very red wall seat, and my constituency is nothing like that. But I think it's because we bring our own personalities as well. So I only talk about food security and sustainability and issues that people often say are sort of
nothing else down the Dog and Duck.
Well, yeah, but actually, if in the Dog and Duck they serve smaller portions and you're quite hungry, you probably talk about food and the cost of living, and so it's kind of approaching cost of living from a different angle.
In the end, people want to improve their lives in some sort of way, and I think the problem that the Conservative Party has now is it's quite difficult to look someone in the eye when they say, well, what's better in my life than it was 4 years ago? And that's, if I was a Labour strategist, I would just bang on about that the whole time. I'm sure there are people who are better off than they were 4 years ago, but I have my doubts as to whether a majority of them are in those seats.
Yeah, and I mean, do you think an honest answer from those MPs in those seats might well be, there isn't a party that can deliver you a better future in the short term, because we're in a sort of managed recession, and the world is a more dangerous place. Because of COVID, we have the books to balance, and the
people don't want to hear that.
I know.
They want a positive message. How are you going to make my life better? And Labour somehow have got away with coming up with a whole raft of policies which aren't really policies. Yeah. But then their main selling point is they're not the other lot. Yeah. And I didn't think you could really win an election from that position, but given that they've had this sustained poll lead for a long time now, maybe they can. Maybe that's a strength for them, I don't know. I still think that people, they want to know what your vision of the sunny uplands is and how you're going to get people there. Now, Boris was really good at that sort of thing. None of the current lot have any idea how to articulate that message. Now, his failing was that he didn't deliver on it, I'm afraid. And if he had, would he still be there? Well, we'll never know. But I think the chances are he might have been.
I mean, certainly the levelling up mission, vision, whatever we call it, is I believe what needs to happen, but you can't do it in one parliamentary cycle. And that is the problem, that no matter how much money you throw at improving the opportunities in the regions and, the big infrastructure projects, none of them could happen in a 5-year cycle. And it would have been a lot more honest, I guess, to say that to people from the outset and look at, what we do in the short and medium term whilst these are happening on the horizon.
The problem was nobody actually defined what levelling up meant. And if you had been able to go into the 2019 election saying, well, by 2024, this is what we will hopefully have done in this constituency. By 2028, we'll have done this. I think that would have served you quite well now, even if you hadn't achieved everything. But it was too amorphous. It was too unspecific. And just to talk about levelling up doesn't mean that you're actually doing it.
No. Although, I can honestly say, I mean, in Stoke-on-Trent, we've had hundreds of billions of pounds invested in various ways, but the average member of the public walking up the high street won't see the difference. And, that's both frustrating for the fact that there has been money invested. It's very difficult to articulate, the kind of raising educational standards or a building project that has its sort of groundworks in, but you can't see anything yet. That just doesn't excite people.
No, because you're right. They want to see something tangible, and not everything about levelling up can ever be totally tangible, but they at least want a sign. And I think in too many parts of the country they haven't had that sign.
Ironically, in Stoke we have 500 new jobs for immigration. So, it has created jobs locally. I guess the irony is that if we do manage to get the numbers down, then those jobs will not be sustainable. Yeah. Who knows?
If.
In all of your many years of broadcasting, are there any kind of pearls of wisdom that have struck you that have kind of changed your thought on life in general?
I'm often accused of becoming more left-wing, which, given that I always used to describe myself as sort of a straight-down-the-line Thatcherite, I find quite risible because I would still identify as that. I think on some social issues there is an element of truth to it. I would love to know if in 2008 David Cameron had brought in a Rwanda-style scheme, what my stance would have been on it. I'd like to think it would be the same as now, because I'm totally against it. But I can't honestly say that it wouldn't necessarily have been. I think when you do a show like mine and you hear from people every day about their woes and their struggles, it does have an effect on you over time, because I remember we were doing something, this is years ago, I think it was about the bedroom tax or universal credit or something like that. And I had three 55-year-old men in a row in tears on the radio. And that was because they were telling me how this, whatever it was, what benefit it was, had impacted their lives. And you think, well, there's going to be thousands of other people that are in that situation. This is not what it was meant to do. And I thought, well, I can make a theoretical argument for the bedroom tax, but clearly it isn't working in practice. So I think it's that kind of thing where I've probably had a few rough edges knocked off. Does anyone not change their views at all over time? I'm sure there are some ideologues that don't, but I'm not one of them. So,
going back to the ageing theme, there's a concept called the othering of age, which means that we see ageing as something that happens to somebody else that may happen to us at some point in our lives. I mean, obviously we've got there, but if you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, you don't think that it's something you need to plan for. And because of that, that there is a lack of whether it's pension planning or planning what housing we're going to need. Is there anything that government can do to help people prepare better so that they don't find themselves poor in old age.
Well, not ruin a pension system would be a start, which Gordon
Yes.
Brown did in 1997. That is a really difficult one because I'd always had a small private pension, which I still contribute to today, but I've never gone from the premise that would ever amount to anything. So luckily my partner had invested wisely in housing, and basically if we have any extra money, we put it into property, and that's our pension. Now, if you were sitting there as a financial advisor, you would say that's wrong, you shouldn't be doing that. Well, it works for us, and I have no confidence that my pension will ever amount to anything. I think at the moment it'll be worth $2,700 a year or something. Well, nobody can live on that. I could have paid a lot more into it, but then since 1997, I've never trusted the pension system. Now, again, you can say that's totally illogical, but to my mind, it isn't. So I've always thought, well, build up a property portfolio, and then when you need to sell a bit of it, just do it. And I think it was interesting that the week I turned 60 was the week that the ageing process really was brought home to me, when I fell off a stage in a theatre and ended up 12 feet below in the orchestra pit. And I was in hospital. I didn't actually break anything, but I tore ligaments and all that sort of thing. And it was a real, I don't know about a warning, but it sort of, for the first time, I suppose I felt my age. And then about 9 months after that, I fell over at the top of a tube escalator and broke my hip. Now, I didn't know at that time that I'd got osteoporosis, which I thought only women got, but clearly not. And again, that was a real sort of sit-up moment. Well, actually, I couldn't sit up, but... and it also taught me something, in that, I was laying on the floor for a minute. Nobody came to my aid at all. It was just quite incredible. And I spent a week in hospital in St Thomas's, which was a brilliant experience. I'm actually, in a strange way, glad I went through it, because it taught me a lot, just observing what goes on in a hospital. It shattered a few stereotypes. But to have both of those things happen, and then also have issues with my eyesight through the diabetes, all within the space of a year, that really brings home the ageing process to you. Because up until I was probably 50, I hardly ever visited a GP. So I've always looked at myself as somebody who's sort of intrinsically quite healthy. But because I've always had a sweet tooth, I kind of always thought I probably would become a diabetic, and I have no self-control over what I put in my gob. So, I tried to do a lot better now, but it's not easy.
Well, I think you're unlucky, because I'm a chocoholic, and so far, touch wood, I'm still able to
I've gone
indulge.
from the 1st of January to now, I haven't bought any sweets or chocolate. You have no idea how difficult that's been. That doesn't mean to say I haven't eaten any. If you suddenly produced a chocolate thing out of your bag, I would eat it, but I won't buy it, which reduces consumption by about 95%.
So, talking about how...
Notice you're not producing a chocolate.
So my bag is in my office. Otherwise, I would, of course. I think I've got some butter tablet, which is kind of pure sugar, isn't it? You say that a fall and feeling less well has made you kind of, I suppose, be aware of your age. And we talked about what government might do to help us go into older age in a healthier way. There is a big piece, I think, around investment in prevention. So, healthier lifestyle equals longer life with better health outcomes.
It's a real balance, though, isn't it? Because people don't want to be nannied. They don't want government to say, thou must eat this or not eat that. And it's a very difficult balance to strike. And I've yet to think of a single health minister that's ever successfully been able to launch one of those campaigns. I'm sure somebody will think of some, and there probably have been successful campaigns, but I can't think of one at the moment.
I don't think so, because I've done a lot of work on obesity, and I think that there have been 90 reports written on obesity in the last 30 years. And, we saw Boris try to do something when he almost died of COVID because of his weight, and, the legislation that was going to come through has been kicked into the long grass. It's very difficult. In opposition, people always say they're going to do something, and then when they're in government, it's a slightly different story. Thinking about advice that you might give to your much younger self? Is there anything that you know now that you wish you'd
I did
known?
actually write a letter to my 16-year-old self on my blog donkeys years ago. I can't remember what it said now. I think I would say be a little bit more confident. And although people say, well, you're in the media, of course you're confident, I'm actually quite a shy person. If I go into a room of strangers, it's my worst nightmare. I hate it. So I think sort of be more confident in yourself, be more confident in your ability to argue, which I am now. And if you talk about subjects for 3 hours on the radio every night that you know nothing about, that you actually on a lot of the subjects you don't have necessarily a particular view, you end up being able to argue anything. And when I used to go on Question Time or any questions, I would always go on with some cue cards, and I'd have like 5 bullet points for each subject that I thought might come up. And then somebody said to me one day, why do you do that? Because you talk about all these subjects that you know nothing about every night. So I don't do it anymore. I just go on and say what I've got to say. And I've never dried up, so far anyway.
Brilliant. Do you have a bucket list?
I think, again, I did write one once. What was on it? I'd love to go to South Korea, Japan and Taiwan and Hong Kong. I don't know why, I just would. I've got into South Korean television dramas. They're really, really good. So that's something. I do like to travel. I'd like to visit all 50 states of the US. I think I'm on about 30 so far. I'd like to become a director of West Ham United. That's never going to happen. What else? I don't think there's much in the media that I would say I haven't done that I would want to do. I've never wanted to be a TV presenter, which is why, in a way, I regret radio going down the TV route, because I thought, well, if I wanted to be a TV presenter, I'd have probably tried to do that. And I sort of slightly hanker for the days when you're in a musty old studio that nobody can see, but it's really intimate. Whereas now, as you know, coming on my programme, it's a TV studio. Yeah. It's a lovely studio, but sometimes I sort of hanker after the old days. Love to be a member of the House of Lords, but that's not going to happen either. I'm too...
No.
No, I do know. So I don't get obsessed by things that I haven't done, because, I mean, there are all sorts of things that people would love to do in their lives but never get around to doing. I've done so much in my life that I never thought... I've either met or interviewed every Prime Minister since Harold Wilson. Now, okay, to a lot of people that will mean nothing, but to me that means an awful lot. I've written or edited more than 50 books. I think I've got a little bit of a legacy in literature. So I'm quite happy. If I died tomorrow, I think I would feel I'd led a very fulfilled life.
Fantastic. On that note, Iain, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's been fascinating.